Hi, I welcome you all to the very first episode of A Farm in My Backyard. And today we have a very special guest, Dr. John Perkins from Evergreen State College from US, and he will be sharing some insights on agriculture and climate change and will help us frame the solutions for the problems we have currently in front of us. So stay tuned with us and we will be live in 3, 2, 1, and let's go.
You do is you push the button and I'll talk. And when you've heard enough, you push the button and I'll stop.
So directly starting with some questions.
Like we have the synthetic fertilizer, like talking of the urea and nitrogen based fertilizer. If we are applying these fertilizer as Dr. BJ yesterday talked about how the farmers over, as the urea is being subsidized here, how the farmers overdose their fields with the urea. And as we all know that it also have a volatilization losses, which can also add up to the the greenhouse gas emission, and talking the largest perspective to the global environment change. So what's your opinion on this? How we can tackle the situation? Like we are subsidizing fertilizers here, but that's uh, pushing us towards the other direction rather than helping us to cope with the issues in.
So what should India do?
Yes, means how we can collectively, holistically think upon it and uh, frame some solutions.
Well, the simple answer is I don't know. But ultimately, you have to think beyond the I don't know to figure out, well, what could we do? One idea, of first, is either end or reduce the subsidies, or gear the subsidies so that a farmer gets this. How does the farmer get the subsidy? Is it when the farmer goes to the supply store? Is the price of the fertilizer already
Yeah, usually
reduced?
actually we have means verified document, like we say Aadhaar card. It's basically a document being provided by government to everyone. It's for the identity verification, and on the base of that, if we are providing that to,
To the shopkeeper.
he will not he will do the document verification and provide us the prices on the subsidy rates only, like it's a reduced price being provided to the farmer.
Okay. So the money
Yes.
as the subsidy pays for goes to the manufacturer or to the merchant? I mean, a manufacturer has costs
Yes.
to produce the fertilizer.
Yes.
And then the merchant has costs to buy the fertilizer and have it in his shop.
Yeah. So I just made the things clear. So the fertilizers are generally here governmentally controlled, like it's in the government control.
I see.
So these are generally, the government provides the other money rather than the overall cost to the company, the manufacturers. It's under a single unit. Like all the brands are controlled by the body under the means the agriculture government, the government of India, and basically these all are regulated fertilizers. The shopkeeper also buy on the subsidized, provides on the subsidized.
So are the fertilizer manufacturers government companies?
Yeah.
State-owned companies?
Yes, majorly are. But if it's a private company, it's also been provided the incentives and the money.
I see. Okay.
Since
One thing you could do is a farmer would have to come in and have a document saying how much land they had. And then the amount of fertilizer the farmer could purchase could be limited to the proper application, the optimal application rate, so that the farmer isn't able to buy enough to over-fertilize. I mean, I don't know politically how if that would work. But if the farmer can't buy more than his land amount needs, then that could help reduce the over-application of nitrogen fertilizers. And that would be a start.
You can see that government is actually cutting down the subsidies.
Okay.
Actually, they have different tenures here, like the government have a tenure. So in the long term, they are also focusing on decreasing the subsidies, shifting them to other fertilizers.
Mm-hmm. Phosphorus and potassium or micronutrients?
Yes, actually, we have basically a formed of NPK. The mixed fertilizers are being promoted. It's being pushed by the government. Like in the definite proportion, the NPK is being provided in the back.
I see. Okay.
So, but they are lesser subsidized
Uh,
rather than comparing to the urea and the DAP.
yeah.
So that's government is also working on it. They are pushing it in the market.
Mhm. It strikes me, and I'm speaking here knowing very little, but it strikes me it's easier for the government to help regulate the prices to the point and regulate the amount that a farmer can buy to the amount that the farmland needs. What's harder, or much harder, in my view, was the whole premise of the Green Revolution to get the high yields was to breed plants that would respond positively to the fertilizer, that the traditional varieties would lodge because they would grow too much. The stem could not support the grain head, and the semi-dwarf wheats and rices didn't grow so tall, and they had a strong stem, and so you could get a big grain head.
Yeah.
And it all depended on nitrogen fertilizer. So that is harder to get because if there isn't adequate nitrogen fertilizer, you start losing yields. And to me, the question then becomes, well, is there a way to provide the plant with nitrogen without doing it through fertilizers? And of course, legumes can fix their own nitrogen. I know there have been efforts, I don't know how far they've advanced, to transfer genes to support nitrogen fixation into non-legumes. I don't know if they exist yet. Maybe you know.
No, not actually. Means the scientists also have a conviction, like if they generally develop the varieties of on the crops which the major cereal crops actually do not have that fixation capacity of nitrogen. So they are also thinking upon it, like to it's not been done yet, but it will be, I think so, eureka for agriculture. Like if they have something cereal crop being fixing that nitrogen into the soil.
Yes. And then one problem that might emerge is, well, the plant has to divert energy to synthesizing the nitrogen into an available form, and that energy cannot go into producing grain. So you are stuck with, well, if you make a wheat or rice plant being able to fix nitrogen, would the yields just automatically reduce because the plant is diverting energy to another purpose? And to me, that's what makes the nitrogen problem so difficult. Another avenue, and here I'm speaking like I'm guessing.
Yes,
Because this is not the field I work in. But is there a way to find bacteria that could be maybe a soil additive that would help degrade the nitrogen fertilizer? So rather than emitting nitrous oxide, it emits an innocuous form of nitrogen, a nitrogen gas. The nitrous oxide, the N2O, extraordinarily powerful greenhouse gas. It's something like 200 or 300 times more powerful than carbon dioxide. And so a small amount of nitrous oxide captures a lot of heat in the greenhouse effect. And so what you really need to do is get rid of the nitrous oxide. And is there a way to do that? And at that point, I'm kind of stymied. I don't know.
Yeah.
Something I think could not work, but I guess is theoretically possible. Could you arrange some system that captured the nitrous oxide as it was emitted and keep it from going into the atmosphere? I don't see how you would do that because it's not emitted in large amounts. So it's a very dilute gas, but it's a very powerful greenhouse gas. So the nitrogen problem, I mean, to me, that is, in terms of dealing with climate change, that is really a very central problem that I don't see with solutions. Now, maybe somebody who is working in the field says, well, they know something that I don't know. They do see ways, but I've been starting to look around to see, well, who's working on this? What are they trying to do? For example, when B.J. Singh gave his talk on nitrogen, I had to leave after his talk, and I didn't get to come back for the question period. But the question I wanted to ask him was, in his studies of finding what happened when nitrogen was too low, nitrogen was just right, nitrogen was too high, has he thought of doing experiments about what are the conditions which lead to minimum nitrous oxide emissions? And I don't know whether he is doing things like that or thinking about them. That's the question I wanted to ask him, because he knows a lot more about nitrogen fertilizers than I do. Well, unfortunately, I couldn't come back to the question period, so I didn't get to ask my question.
Actually, the sir study, he's from our department, this department of soil science. I'm also from a master student in soil science. So basically, here the major studies, like many of the scientists are also working on the greenhouse gas emissions, but major studies basically how the effect of nitrogen application is being on the plants. So we can amend the doses according to the optimum use level. So rather than overdosing the fertilizers, we generally have some data to push into the markets that this is the optimum value to away the farmers regarding or to stop the overuse of the nitrogen fertilizer. So basically, the study was showcasing the effect of how an optimum, like the critical range. So basically, we have some critical values on above the plant doesn't show much change. Like I'm putting onto something in the plant. At a point, it generally stops giving some response. So basically, the maxima is received. In the curve, we have a maxima. So at that maxima, we can generate the optimal values. So basically, that study was basically showcasing that.
Right. But did the studies include where was the minimum emission of nitrous oxide? And the sort of connected to that, there's another policy issue that could be thought of, which is if a farmer puts on too much nitrogen fertilizer, is there a way of charging the farmer a cost that the more fertilizer you put on, it seems probable that you would get more nitrous oxide as well as no response from the plants and a decrease in organic matter than the soil. Is there a way of telling the farmer, well, if you do put this amount on, then you suffer a loss in the price your crop will produce. So to give the farmer an incentive to put on only the optimal amount. Now, I could imagine this would be extremely unpopular with farmers.
Yeah.
They would not like it.
Yes.
And India is a democracy, and they would vote accordingly, us, I would assume. So unless you could convince them, part of the problem is you have to convince the farmers that it may be in their interest not to over-fertilize because they're paying too much money, they're not getting any response, they're destroying the soil health, maybe they're emitting more nitrous oxide. And when farmers understand that, they can take actions, maybe, to limit the bad things that happen. Now, everything I've said, maybe politically it wouldn't work in India. I asked myself, would it work in the United States? I think I doubt it. Farmers tend to be very independent, and most farmers look at the world and see, I can't get a high enough price for my bad, and anything that diminishes their income, they are very unhappy with. And when farmers are unhappy, well, we know what the farmers unhappy French farmers, we know what they do. They get their tractors and they go cause a traffic jam in Paris. Now, would farmers in India go cause a traffic jam in Delhi? I don't.
Actually, they were showcasing some yesterday picture. The Dr. Buller was showing some picture like some of the farmer was protesting in some foreign country. They were putting on the cow dung over the democratic people. How the government agents. So
Yes.
we don't have that thing here, but yeah, there are some peaceful tests and all.
Yes. And, that's good because whatever we do to solve greenhouse gas emissions and keep yields high in the it can't leave some group disadvantaged and harmed socially and economically. Otherwise it's going to be so unpopular. Politicians will react to the protests and say, no, we can't do that. So that's where this problem becomes, it's got a lot of science in it, but overlaid on the science is a huge amount of politics. And you can't solve the problem unless you get the politics and the science to mesh. And in the long run, of course, continued emissions of chemicals like nitrous oxide are going to make farming impossible. Unless we do something that I can't yet imagine what we would do. When the temperatures get too high, when the water is not there, how does a plant give yield?
Yes.
How do you and I eat? It becomes very personal at some level. I don't know if that helps, but it's, when I say I don't know the answer, it's the answer. This is the answer I give when, well, okay, what can we imagine?
Yes.
We might have a vision that what we want is no nitrous oxide, and we have a vision we want good yields. So how do you get there?
So, Dr. When also we have, I generally wants your opinion on this. Like you have basically seen the Borlong era, the Green Revolution, where it started, how the things got. So, what do you think around, since we have some of the negative concerns, like we have concerns now of the Green Revolution being we have ahead of us. Like we have emissions, we have like in basically talking of the Punjab as well, we also have some cases where people are suffering from cancer due to have consumption of the the pesticide and the fertilizers being incorporated into the food. So it actually biomagnified into the chain of our consumption. So basically, how you think upon it, how the green revolution basically went, and what scenarios it has in the present era we need to work upon.
Well, again, let me give you the short answer.
Yes.
I think what we had in the 1960s, 1970s was Green Revolution 1. I think now is the time for Green Revolution 2.
So summer teacher.
And in Green Revolution 1, and from looking at the history of it, to me there was kind of an accident that it even happened. At the end of World War II, Japan surrendered and the United States occupied Japan. Part of the occupation included scientists from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and they observed that Japanese farmers were growing a very short wheat variety they had never seen, and getting very high yields. And so they obtained some of the seeds and sent them to Washington State University in the United States. And there was a man there, a scientist, Orville Vogel, who said, oh, well, he planted them, and he found they were very short compared to the ones. Let me give you the demonstration. I watched an English farmer, Bluebiswell. He said, it used to be the wheat I grew was up to here. Oh, but now it's up to here. And I had a picture of this showing the wheat used to be this high. And, this was an amazing transformation of the wheat plants. And
Some on board, some in preparation.
it kind of came about by accident, just because some USDA farmers in a military occupation of a foreign country found seeds and sent them to the United States. Orville Vogel in Washington State said these are very interesting varieties, and they were rather quickly adopted in Washington State. But he also sent them to Norman Borlaug in Mexico.
Yes.
And Norman Borlaug was in touch with M.S. Swaminathan and B.P. Paul in India. And when B.P. Paul and Swaminathan learned of these varieties, he invited Borlaug to come to India.
Yes.
And Borlaug was a very effective salesperson of an idea. And he said, well, you can get much higher yields. And of course, you got the higher yields because the plants now could withstand high nitrogen fertilization. And so the Green Revolution, in a matter of relatively not few years, India adopted these. And now there, as I understand it, there are only a few places that still grow the traditional wheats that are as tall as a person. And they use it. For example, in England, there are some farmers who do grow it. They don't grow it for the wheat grain. They grow it for the straw.
Okay.
It's very good for thatched roofs. You know what a thatched roof is? It's basically wheat straws very tightly packed up. Sun can and water can't get through it. And so it was a traditional roofing material for English farmhouses.
Okay.
Pre-modern times. And there are still many thatched roofs in England because it's actually a pretty good roof. So most people grow wheat for the grain. Only a few still grow it for the straw. But that launch, and there was a similar story in rice. I don't know the details of the rice story as well. But basically both wheat and rice got the semi-dwarfing genes. high response to nitrogen fertilizer. And that was one considered good. Hello. That's what they envisioned more production of food.
Yes.
And they got it. And now we know, but when you do that, you start getting other problems. So now we need to have a vision of, well, what is it we want? Well, we want the grain, but we don't want the side effects. Too much nitrogen destroys the organic matter in the soil, probably releases more nitrous oxide, get a more greenhouse effect. But you have to have some sort of sense that what you think you want is possible to obtain. Is it possible to obtain? Well, here's where I would say there are preliminary results that, yes, it may be possible. Will those be correct? I don't know. The thing about science is when you think you know something, and then it turns out you really don't, you stop believing that you know something. And you say, okay, you look for different reasons. Science is self-correcting. When it suddenly becomes obvious that you've got a problem that you didn't want, then you have to think again and think some more. Well, and that's why I say, we need a green revolution too. I'm not a scientist who can contribute to that. It's not the kind of work I do. But that's where I think we
So
are.
basically, as you will also have some of the research based on the organic farming. Basically, I read somewhere you have a paper regarding you have some work on the organic farming.
Actually, I'd never published anything on organics, and
Okay, with someone, actually I misunderstood something.
or at least I don't think of it as.
Okay. Actually, I was looking through something from your blogs has been provided on the Evergreen website. So some research publications. So Mr. Rachel Jamson.
Oh, yes. She was a graduate student,
Okay.
so it was really her work.
Okay. So basically, what insights you have on the organic farming? Basically, in India, as it's basically targeting the premium market. The organic produce in bees being produced by the farmers, which being sold to the markets at a premium price. So basically, it's no, as many of the people belong to the middle-class families and don't have that budget to fit in the organic produce into their daily consumptions. So what do you think of the organic farming as a solution we can means use to mitigate these, as we have lesser emissions in that?
Uh, I think there are clearly some insights from organic farming.
Yes.
At one time, I was quite interested in organic farming, but aside from sponsoring a thesis by a student, I've never published myself on it. But clearly, there are ways of getting nutrients like nitrogen to plants other than synthetic fertilizer. The problem that usually emerges is, and it's a problem that actually stems back to fossil fuels.
Okay.
Fossil fuels are, relative to the value of food, very cheap. And you can make nitrogen fertilizer very cheaply with fossil fuels. And when farmers see, I have a very expensive way of getting nitrogen, I have to collect all the manure, all the plant residues, or I can use some synthetic nitrogen fertilizer. And the amount of labor taken, the costs of doing synthetic fertilizers over organic fertilizers is much less. And at least in the United States, someone has told me the United States is the most relentlessly capitalist country in the world. I don't really know whether that's true or not, but the United States tries to be relentlessly capitalistic, which means decisions are made by prices. And if the price is low, people will go for the low-priced option because they sell into a market that has lots of competition, lots of in the United States, we have such a large surplus of land to people, that the problem with American agriculture for over 150 years has been overproduction compared to what some customer might buy.
Okay.
And so American farmers have always gravitated to the lowest priced option, because when they go to market to sell their grain, if their neighboring farmer is using cheaper methods, the neighbor's grain gets sold first at auction, and the high-priced farmer may discover that nobody wants to buy his product. If he markets it as organic, without synthetic fertilizers, without pesticides, then there are some customers who will say, "Oh, I will buy that more expensive product," because they think it's a good product for them.
Okay.
But the number I'm going to tell you, it's something that I think it's funny, but it's maybe very American.
Okay.
America invented McDonald's. A country that invents McDonald's doesn't care about the quality of its food.
Unless it's making some money, unless it's earning them a gig.
Yes. And McDonald's for food consumption in the United States, McDonald's is one of the lowest prices you can get, aside from cooking it yourself at home. But if you don't want to cook it at home, or you're hungry and you're not at home, go to McDonald's. It's very inexpensive. And McDonald's food keeps you alive. It's even fairly tasty. It's not very good for you. And that's the thing about American farming and food consumption, is it is driven largely by a capitalist ethos, which means the producers have to compete with each other, and you compete by lowering the price of production. And synthetic nitrogen fertilizers lowered the price of consumption, the price of production.
Production.
And so, to change that would require a very large change in the cultural values of the United States. Changing cultural values is really hard. People usually won't change their cultural values unless their life depends on it. And so far, most people have not seen their life depending on it, so they don't. I have a hunch Indians may be the same, but India is different in many ways. India's, to me, has always seemed a half capitalist, half socialist. It's more of a mix than the United States is. The UK is more of a mix than the United States.
Yes.
I think Canada is more of a mix than the United States. But for the United States, low cost of production on the farm is paramount, except if you go into the organic production. I had a student once who he told me an experience. He had left. He was an organic farmer, and he left organic farming and came back to school to finish his college education. And he told me his experience was, when I started in Washington State, I could grow organic carrots and make a good living. And then suddenly, California had more organic carrot growers. California has a warmer, better climate for agriculture. Washington State is colder. Okay. And he said, suddenly the market in Washington was flooded with organic carrots from California. He said, I couldn't compete with the California farmers. I went out of business because he had carrots, but to make any money, he had to charge more, largely due to the colder climate. That the plants don't grow as fast in Washington State. And so he ran into, and I told him this, he said, oh, you have run into the quintessential problem of American agriculture. If some farmer down the road can produce lower than you at a lower cost, that farmer is going to sell his produce first. And your produce is going to be sold last, or maybe it won't be sold at all, because this is another thing that's embedded in the food market. Once people have enough to eat, they don't buy any more. If you have enough breakfast, you don't want any more, at least not till lunch. And so the market is limited by the fact that people just won't buy food if they don't need it. And why would you? So the American market does offer very low cost food compared to many other places in the world. Its quality is often not very good. It's often dosed in lots of chemicals and pesticides and things like that. But the farmers who are in business are the ones who manage to keep being at the low cost of production. The ones who could not match those costs got run out of business. That's actually called the treadmill effect. That is, farmers are highly competitive. And if you go to markets are often in auctions where food processors and supermarkets, markets are going to bid on carrots or peppers or wheat for making bread. And if the final auction price that is accepted is below your cost of production, you are not going to sell your stuff. You have the wheat, you have the carrots, you can't sell it. Nobody wants to buy it. And I think, the United States in some ways, it may be the most relentlessly capitalist country, but I think this phenomenon of if you have a surplus of food, the person with the highest production costs is going to find that they can't sell their food. Now, sometimes you can't sell your food, and yet there are hungry people. And the hungry people would be delighted to buy the food if they had any money. And we have this problem in the United States. You have it in India. Access to food by all people means that there has to be a certain amount of money among all people so that they can buy the food they need. So this is where it's really complicated, is because how do we deal with income inequality? Rich people very seldom go hungry. Poor people often go hungry. Farmers who have high production costs often don't sell their produce or can't sell their produce, even though there are hungry people. That's why, this is both a science and a cultural and a political and an economic problem all wrapped up together. And it's, in terms of what happens with nitrogen fertilizer, it's in the mix of this. So it's not just nitrogen fertilizer. It's nitrogen fertilizer playing a particular role in a very large group of concerns about how much food do we need, how much food do people have money to access. If you're a poor farmer, you may continue to eat raw, but if you're a poor city person, you don't have access to land. You don't have the skills to be a farmer. And so urban poor suffer the most. Rural poor may suffer, but they may eat. And then, of course, the rich in the cities and the rich in farming have no problems whatsoever. Except maybe they're putting too much nitrous oxide and carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, and climate change is going to cause a crisis for them. But we're not at the crisis stage yet. You know, it's when insect resistance first became a problem with the modern pesticides. I know there are stories in American cotton production where, and I actually was on a study tour and I went out to the fields and saw this. Okay, I had one farmer in Texas. We looked at his field and it had these beautiful green cotton plants. They were, that high. Okay, green, lush. There wasn't a single boll of cotton. The farmer had an absolute, complete failure of the crop that year, and it was because of insecticide resistance and the overuse of insecticides. And that farmer, his attention was riveted on, because he was a wealthy farmer. He went to Texas A&M University and said, I got a problem. You guys need to help me. And that's where integrated pest management came from crises. And at the moment, the world isn't, I'm sorry to say the world does not have enough crisis on this. And I'm loath, I don't want to say that, but it's, sometimes it takes a crisis to get somebody's attention. And when what they're doing just doesn't work anymore, you usually have their attention full blown. If things are still working, they may just say, well, I'll get by, because to change is very hard. I mean, this requires change, and all of us are resistant to change. I mean, what if I used to be a professor? So what if somebody came in and said, well, I can replace you as a professor with a robot? Well, I'm not going to like that. How am I supposed to make my money? If you don't have to pay the robot much money, then, maybe I'm obsolete as a professor. But that's the bottleneck that farmers are in. They have to be able to produce at low cost. And yet the population as a whole needs adequate food, and everybody needs access to it. Yes. And at the moment, we're a long way from any sort of happy solution. And do I know how to solve it? Not really. The only thing I can do is think about it and think about, well, what could you do to make it a little bit better? There's no magic, this invention will cure everything. It's going to be a little piece of change here, a little piece of change there. And ultimately, you may get enough change that things get a little better. The human life doesn't seem to go in magic leaps of crisis to happiness. It goes by fits and starts, little bitty pieces, a lot of suffering, a few triumphs, a few celebrations. And I think that's where farming is. And that's why I think, well, the concept of green revolution too is what we need. And we probably need somebody like B.J. Singh or like Norman Borlaug. Norman Borlaug apparently was very good. He was a scientist, basically. But he could go into the political arena and tell a story that captured the imagination of politicians.
Yes. It's basically the convincing power of some person have that ability to convince the policymakers.
Yes. And M.S. Swaminathan was one of the people who knew of Borlaug's work, brought him to India, and I don't know whether M.S. Swaminathan, I think, was probably pretty good with politicians, but, maybe he needed an American to come say it. Hey, yes, sometimes think Americans have all the answers. We don't. But Norman Borlaug, I did interview him for part of the work I did. And he was a great guy to talk to. And I could see, yes, he could go meet with politicians and he would tell them stories and be very convincing. And in that sense, he was both a good scientist and a good politician. Yes. And that's a rare gift. Most scientists are not good politicians, and most politicians are not good scientists. And there are only a very few people who have the skill or the personality or they catch on how you can convince a politician who knows nothing about the science but does know about political problems. How can you convince him, well, I have something here from science that might help you? And at the time Borlaug came, one of the problems India faced was during the Vietnam War, the American government apparently did put pressure on India to support the American effort in Vietnam. And the Indians did not want to do that. There were a lot of Americans who didn't want to do that either. I happened to be one of them. But when India faced the pressure, the United States was supplying lots of surplus wheat at the time to India. India was not a high producer, was not an exporter of wheat. And it made the Indian government vulnerable to pressure from the United States. And all I can say is, thank goodness the Indian government said, no, that war's, you should end it. I have it. Yes. Don't ask us to support it. End it. Get out. So, sometimes these things get very heated in their, and the strength of the politics around it. And, well, I don't know. Does all that help you think about this?
So lastly, since you arranged a workshop for the participants, I also I was one of the gladly I was also one of the participant in there. So it was a good session. Like, we have to present our ideas in front of all. So basically, one of your means you say learning, if you can share. Actually, I have a small channel where I generally post down some of the information related videos related to soil science and all. So if you have some of the basically learnings, you can share with the youth and the other people coming into the agriculture field, so they can easily frame the answers for the questions we have in front of us.
Yes. This afternoon, one of the last things of the conference, I'm going to report back from the results of the workshop and give some. We got 80 or 90 suggestions for research and teaching.
Yes.
So I can't go through all 90, but we picked out a couple that sort of seemed to be really interesting.
Yes.
And so I will give a report back on the suggestions for research and the suggestions for teaching. What I found, just as the organizer of the workshop, was I was really impressed and uplifted by the enthusiasm of the participants in the workshop.
Yes.
It seemed to me people were taking the assignment very seriously, and they actually worked hard, and I had to read all these sheets that were turned in. Oh, yes. It took me a couple of hours yesterday. That's why I couldn't stay after BJ sang.
Okay.
I had to go work on that.
Sure.
But I'll report back on it. And I'm going to send Rajinder a complete list of all the ideas.
Okay.
And I don't know what can be done with them, but they were good ideas, especially the ones on teaching. One of the major things that came out of the teaching, the suggestions for better teaching, was more contact with farmers, more practical work in the field, not just classroom work. And that was something I thought was really impaired, because in my own teaching, what I found was I could get up and talk about some problem and say, well, here's what's happening, and here are the issues at stake, and here are possible answers. But it was just, a professor going yak, 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 yak. But then I remember I took a class, almost all of whom were urban people. Very few farm kids were in the class. But we went down to a farm near the Evergreen State College, and it was a really good farmer. He loved having people come to his farm and see his operation. He loved to talk about it. And before we went, my students were kind of negative, and why do farmers do all these things? Why do they use pesticides? Why do they do this? Why do they do that? They're polluting the water. They're killing the fish. When they came back, the farmer had convinced them that he had real issues and that they were starting to take those very seriously. And so the field trip did exactly what I wanted it to do, which was let students talk to somebody who these issues really meant the difference between success or failure of their business, of their livelihood.
So
Okay. Well, did this help?
yeah.
Trying to get at?
Yes.
You got a lot of my opinions.
Maybe a lot of your time as well. So you very patiently provided your guidance. Thank you so much for it.
Oh, well, you're very welcome. And
To have solutions for the problems we have in front of us today, I think so.
yeah. Well, the United States is made the most progress that was ever made in the last 4 years on climate change by having the government take it seriously. And we are now about to enter 4 years in which the government will do everything in its power to stop working on climate change, because our new president doesn't think it's an issue. And to me, and this is strictly my opinion, it has nothing to do with anybody else, just me. So I think this is one of the worst outcomes of the last American election, because if America and China will not change, then nobody else in the world will either.
Yes.
America and China have to change. And India is about third. And then, of course, the European Union, which is the most amenable to change, as far as I can see. But if those four have such huge economies and so many emissions, that a small country, why should a small country do anything if the United States and China aren't doing anything?
Yes.
So that's...
Thank you.
Thank you so much to all the viewers for their keen listening, and we will be again coming with another guest to gain more knowledge on how we can improve agriculture every day. So, thank you so much. Have a great day. See you soon.